Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Please.
A special session is being held on Monday, July 16, 5 o'clock p.m. in the fifth floor conference room regarding a budget workshop. Roll call. Kane. Here. Markley.
Here.
Walters.
Here.
Philbrook.
Here.
Bynum.
Here.
Burrows.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia. Johnson. Alvey.
Here. Thank you. So as the clerk stated, our meeting this evening is the first of several budget workshops. And we have quite a bit of material to cover tonight. And of course, as we know from our spring retreat, we have tremendous needs and obligations and limited resources. And so this is the first of the process, trying to prioritize and decide how we'll move forward. Tonight, I'll pass this on then to Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'll just start by reviewing the agenda that you have in front of you this evening. So we're gonna walk through this evening. Really, we've got 6 different topic areas to go into. The first one is the overview of the budget document. Mr. Lindsay will walk us through that section, just kind of familiarizing you with everything that's in there and how to access different components of it if you haven't already, and to see that. We're going to have a little discussion about the dedicated sales tax and where we are with that, and how the budget is really predicated based on that being renewed. Talk about some of the items from the spring retreat recap. I had a specific request, I think, that related to that from Commissioner Walters. Then we're going to walk through our revenue review. It kind of gives you a good idea of why we're projecting the revenue we're at. So there's quite a bit of detail within that. And really the big item for this evening that we're looking to do is then set the maximum mill levy rate. That is one that really just balances us to a schedule. And as you recall, this does not necessarily need to be the mill rate that we adopt in the end, but you cannot adopt one higher than what we set this at. So we'll have more discussion about that. And then these are the other topics that have come in, and this is a tentative schedule that went through with the mayor, working these up, or where these items could come forward and be presented as we work through the rest of the month, and I'm sure there'll be some additional items to come to it. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Reginald Lindsay, our budget director, and have him do an overview of the budget document. Reggie?
All right, we'll start with the table of contents. One of the new features we have with the table of contents this year is that Michael Peterson and Lease in finance, they both worked with making it clickable, where you can click on the numbers within the table of contents and it'll take you right to that page. So that's a new feature in the table of contents. Next, we have the county administrator's message. Basically here you can find a presentation and also a brief summary of the budget. And here's where the presentation will flow right after that. And then next we have the commissioner's vision, values, goals, and budget guidance. Here we include the vision statement, the mission statement, the strategic plan and values, and also the goals. Also, there are 2 org charts here, one for elected officials, then there also is an operational org chart for the organization. Next, we have the community profile, which breaks down the history and the form of government of the unified government, and then also the major services provided, and then also the community characteristics of the unified government. Next, we have the budget overview, which breaks down the budget process. Also, there's a budget calendar there. Then there's a glossary of terms that you might see. Also, there's a summary of the budgetary and financial policies. We also have the financial policies in the back of the book. These are the financial policies that will newly updated that will come before you all on July 26th to vote on. Next, we have the financial overview. Financial overview includes a notice of the public of the budget hearings for the different funds that we have. So we would have the county general fund, all the funds on the county side, all the funds on the city side, also the SMID, also the Wyandotte County Library Fund. And then there's also, for all the funds, the expenditure budget level for all the funds, and then also the mill levy for those funds. On the screen right now, we have the city general fund. One of the things that we've added here is a net change in fund balance. Shows you the difference in the revenues and the expenditures. Also, we added the CAFR fund balance, which is a new addition also. Also in that section is a summary of the dedicated sales tax. And basically what this does is show you the 3 departments that are funded within the dedicated sales tax, shows you the amount of their budget and their percentage breakdown.
Hey, I want to point out also that beginning on page 89 of the section is a detail of all the revenue forecast. It includes from, I think, 2017 actuals to the proposed budget, so.
Next section is the department expenditure budgets. Basically what we have here are the section summary for the budgets. So basically we have sections for all the departments. So this particular section is community services, which includes parks and rec, also transit, community development. And then we have another section which is public safety, which would include police department, sheriff department, emergency management. Next slide shows a view of a narrative for the department. It kind of breaks it down what this department does, what the highlights of the department was in the past year, and then some new initiatives that they have within the coming year. Next page breaks down financials of the particular department. So we're able to see the categories for their expenses, which we can see at the top there are personnel categories, also a contractual category and the commodity category. And then also we can get another view where we can look at the different funds that fund the particular department. There are 12 different funds that we can see: funds, parks and recreation, and then also we can see the expenditures by the divisions within Parks and Rec. Also, we have a view of the FTE that are in Parks and Rec. It's the second section down. So that's a view of how many people are in each division within Parks and Rec's divisions. Next section is a capital maintenance improvement program. Here we would find our debt projects, our cash projects, and also the equipment that we're funding for the upcoming budget. And it's a 5-year program that goes from 2019 to 2023. And the next slide shows a view of capital cash projects from 2018 to 2023. We also have a grant inventory within the budget document. Basically what this does is break down the grants, gives a summary of the grants by department, also breaks this grants out by if they're federal or state, or if they're both federal and state, and then also private grants that we have. And the last section is the appendices, which includes the financial policies, which will come before Commission to vote on July 26th. And then also we have a detailed position inventory in the back of the budget document, which you can see by department, and it breaks it down by each type of position in the department. We also have the position inventory broke down by all the different types of funds. You can see we have the tax levy funds, the special revenue funds, the enterprise funds, and the grant funds. And then the last here shows the employer paid benefits. These are the percentages and the dollar amounts that the unified government pays for each and every employee, and breaks down if it's single coverage or family coverage for the health insurance. And then there's also shows the vision insurance. Then also shows the retirement rates for each type of employee that we have here at the unified government. So that's a breakdown of the budget document. Are there any questions?
One thing I forgot to mention at the presentation of the budget the other night, that we did receive the 5th straight award, or the budget department received that for 5th straight GFOA award for budget documents. So I was proud to receive that again last year. That was based on last year's document, right?
Yes.
We'll again submit this one in that format. So are there any questions regarding the structure or what's in the document or anywhere to find it? If you do have any, I think that electronic feature they've added this year to be able to have it and click on it and jump throughout the document makes the electronic version even that much more easy to use where we're at. With that, Mayor, I will move on to the next section.
Thank you.
Just wanted to have a little bit of discussion on the dedicated sales tax this evening. because it really plays into the budget. And as you are all aware, the public safety and neighborhood infrastructure dedicated sales tax, and we're up for renewal on August 7th. This is a no tax increase sales tax. It is just maintain what's already in place. It's 3/8 cents, and it all goes to public safety and neighborhood infrastructure, or public safety operations and neighborhood infrastructure. It will continue on from 2020 for 10 years. And what's key in relation to this budget is really, I've based this budget on the assumption that we are going to get this tax renewed, because there's a couple of mill rates being proposed as a reduction. That makes us more reliant on non-property taxes, and this is 10 million with that structure. So it's very important that really as we go through, if that tax is not renewed, we would probably have to come back and think about the structure of this budget after we go through it. It's divided out pretty equally between the police, fire, and our neighborhood infrastructure. This is how the 2018 budget that's before you is proposed. Next. Where we spend the money on a little more specifically goes into streets. Commission neighborhood improvement projects have been key for over the years. Our Safe Routes to Schools programs, community centers, curbs, sidewalks, parks. If you click on or you go to this site, you can see all the different projects around the community, where we have had infrastructure projects over the years. When you actually hover over like one of the stars, that'll give you a little bit of information on that project. So it tells you what street it was we worked on, how much money went into it, and that'll break it out that these are all they're not all 100% funded by the dedicated sales tax, but it'll show you what percentage. So if we spent $2 million from general fund and then another 500,000 from the dedicated or something like that, it's all identified within this. So it's a very good detailed slide to give you that information about where money was spent over the past 8 years. And then of course we buy 50 police patrol vehicles coming in, 15 fire vehicles and ambulances, 8 police motorcycles, the body camera equipment that we're buying this year all comes from this money. And we fund, you hit the next slide, 25 police officers and 25 fire personnel from this. So again, just to recap, it's not a tax increase, 3/8 cents. It's paid by millions of visitors annually that come into our community. So particularly when people go into the Village West area and they buy goods or services out there and they're taxed, the millions of dollars that come in from that perspective. So it's paid by non-Wyandotte County residents, and a great percentage in that area. As I said, it generates over 10 million annually, which by comparison is equal to a number of about 6.5% of what our city general fund is. And as I said, our proposed property tax reduction in this proposed budget assumes renewal of this sales tax. Okay. Now we'll do a little bit of recap on the Spring Strategic Financial Planning Retreat. And with that, I'm going to recognize Kathleen Von Atchen, our Chief Financial Officer.
Hello. So thank you very much, Doug. So we thought it would be good to do a recap of our conversation that we had in the spring. That was in March of this year. As you remember, we discussed a variety of topics under the topic of financial strategic planning, right? And that evening we also did a group exercise. So, think back to 4 or 5 months. We basically broke you all up into 3 different groups, and each of you had your own room with your own model and a list of all the policy initiatives that we identified, which you could add to, of areas where you might want to fund, various programs that you might want to fund as part of the budget. And then we also provided you with a 5-year financial forecast, and the goal that we set out for you to accomplish that evening was to, within your group, come up with what you would do with your, the financial forecast while still maintaining the fund balance at the 17% level. And then report back out to the group as a whole, or the committee as a whole. And then that feedback helped all the departments and the county administrator form the budget that we're now proposing to you. So the policy initiatives that we listed for you back in March, which of course this is not all inclusive, there's just some suggested policy areas that we identified were the city mill levy reduction, additional funding for the SOAR or for blight reduction, additional funding for street infrastructure or neighborhood improvements, funding for the Parks Master Plan, funding for additional funding on a pay-go basis rather than using debt, so more cash funding for projects. Various department special initiatives to allow the management to have more flexibility when ideas come up in the middle of the year. A reduction in the franchise tax pilot payment that we received from the BPU. Funding for economic development initiatives that are that can't fund themselves entirely, so the gap funding. An increase in the general fund reserve to a 3 months of expenditures rather than the 2 months. And then maybe also additional payments towards the water pollution loan repayment that occurred. There was a loan that was taken out back in 2014, and we need to continue paying that. Actually, it's the sewer pollution. So now what I'm going to do is recap briefly the results of each group, so that just as a reminder. All right, so the first group we're calling the break conference room group, all right? Because we figured you might remember which group you're in if you remember what location you were sitting. And this group, based on your discussion, decided upon, of course, here's the graph up here. So the blue is the amount of resources that are available that we identified through the forecast at that time. And the red columns are here kind of basically spend down those amounts. So, so this group recommended a 2 mil reduction in 19 going forward all the way to 2023, and additional street funding of $650,000, and economic development gap fund of $500,000 for each of those years. The next group is the budget. Right, which by the way, oh, and then also I meant to mention, beginning in 2021, the mill reduction was increased by 2 mils. So, and I just wanted to point out that this scenario isn't affordable because it falls below the 0, given the forecast assumptions. The second group is the budget conference room group, and they recommended a 1 mil increase in 19, a 2 mil increase in 20, and then a 3 mil increase in 2021. With that going forward, $500,000 each year for SOAR, $500,000 more each year for street and neighborhood infrastructure, $250,000 each year for Parks Master Plan, $500,000 for additional funding of cash funding of capital projects, and then $1 million for the economic development gap fund. And then the third
Just to clarify, they recommended a mil decrease. I think you said you said increase, so there wasn't any recommended increases. They were decreases.
Oh, thank you very much. I beg your pardon. Thank you for clarifying. I did mean reduction. Yeah, mil reduction. So then a mil reduction for the standing committee room, which was seated about right here. They recommended a a 2 mil reduction on the city general fund side and a 1 mil reduction on the county side. And that's true going forward for all 5 years. The Parks Master Plan funding that one at $500,000 each year. And then it recommended that we reduce our temporary note debt by $7 million by reducing our base operating expenditures by $7 million but there wasn't any specificity on where to reduce $7 million from our $200 million general fund. So after reviewing each of these, after this meeting that evening, the next few days, all of us got together and we decided, we took your recommendations and your direction, and this is what our proposed 2019 budget includes, resulting from this exercise. We have proposed a 2 mil reduction in the city general fund. Just to summarize, there were 2 of your groups from the exercise that recommended a 2 mil reduction to the city general fund. One group recommended just a 1 mil reduction in 2019. And there was also one of the 2 groups on the top also recommended a 1 mil reduction in the county general fund. So we felt that a 2 mil reduction was the consensus view from all of you, and that's what we included in our revenue estimates. Additional cash-funded street and neighborhood infrastructure we've included in the 2019 proposed budget, funded by dedicated sales tax funding, an additional $300,000 for neighborhoods resurfacing, $150,000 for the Holiday Drive design, and $250,000 for the Safe Route to Schools funding. Also in 19, there is in the city general fund, there is funding for an additional $300,000 in bridge inspections. So more funding in that category. We also, from the feedback and from the discussion, took back and included debt and lease financing reductions within our proposal. And so there is a recommended debt financing of $13.5 million rather than what has typically been set as the target, which was $15 million. So it's $1.5 million less than we typically take out in new debt each year for capital investments. We also switched to cash funding of 30 police cars in 2018 that had previously been planned to be lease financed. And we also cash funded one ambulance in 2019 that had previously been planned to be lease financed. On the Economic Development Gap Fund, there isn't specific funding in there for this proposal or initiative at this time, but there are resources that we are going to be utilizing that we collect from private companies that undertake an IRB financing. And those vary depending on what kind of development we have, but it can go up to as much as $400,000 in fees. So that's a resource that we can utilize. But we're awaiting adoption of a policy for this program. And then the last item is the Parks Master Plan. Now we do have additional funding proposed in 2019 for parks related facilities and other capital needs. $115,000 for parks restroom replacement, and then $100,000 in the Wyandotte County Lake Shop for reconstruction of that shop. But a comprehensive funding plan is proposed to be developed as part of the 2020 budget process. So so that's the plan there. So that's what we have as a recap for the spring retreats.
Yes, Commissioner McKiernan.
I appreciate this. I'm sure all of these initiatives are very good and are going to end up being a good addition to our budget. As most of you know, I had some problems with the organization of this particular session, not the least of which was I didn't feel like I felt like we would have been better served for the commission to have come back together after the breakouts and have discussion and possibly come to consensus rather than just turn in our results and have that discussion and that consensus reached outside of us. The mayor and Mr. Bach both received a very lengthy email from me the following day in which I outlined some of my suggestions for how I think this exercise could be much better in terms of helping us forecast and guide the budget the next time we go through this. So I'm hoping that we can continue to work on this so that the commission gets a little bit better direction in terms of how to set some of these budget initiatives. Thank you.
In the end, I'll just note, Mayor, that most of the money for this budget was focused on those top three ones on that line, to how to get the mill reduction in place and then to keep infrastructure there but go away from debt and lease financing as best we could. And that's really what we worked hard on to make this budget work that way.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner, for making the comment about the follow-up after the, it would have been very nice for us to be able to cuss and discuss it together instead of just throwing, because we learned individually in our own groups and then bringing us together to talk about that, I think we would have accomplished a lot more. Thank you.
Okay, well, that takes us to our revenue review. And I'll just note, we handed you documents that had about 60 slides in it. So through this is already slide 42. So we do have it structured so we could move right along through these. Maybe a little bit more detail in this next series of slides that we're going to go through, but we want to make sure you have a good understanding. And if you have questions as Kathleen moves through this, please don't hesitate to stop or challenge or whatever you want to as far as how we came upon our assumptions. I know these are areas that a lot of times as we go through the meetings or the workshops, you'll go back to that and ask, now, what's that assumption based on or whatever. So that's where Kathleen worked on this to try to structure it so you would have that information up front and we can work from there. I know the Economic Development Finance Committee gets a little bit more of this information in detail, but we know everybody needs it as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen again.
So, yeah, I want to thank you very much, Doug, and I'd like to introduce Debbie Johnsher, who's going to be making the presentation on the revenue estimates.
Okay.
Good evening. So I'm just going to go through the process that we look at for when we're preparing our revenue estimates and some of what's included in our estimates in the budget for 2019. So this slide just shows the budget process. We start with the budget preparation, which is the process we're currently in. We're looking at our revenue forecasting and producing a balanced budget where revenues and expenditures equal. Or we also want to look at deficit reductions that can catch up with you if we make unrealistic revenue projections. If we're too conservative, that can sometimes restrict the expenditures that we can budget for. And if we're overly optimistic on revenues, we could end up, and we don't receive the amount that we project, then that could cause an issue with our fund balance at the end of the year. Also, one-time versus ongoing items can present a problems. We may just have one-time items would be something that hits the budget in one particular year. The idea of having a healthy fund balance can offset some of those expenditures that can occur, but we want to make sure that we correct that in future years so that we don't continue drawing down the fund balance. So once the budget's adopted, then we go into budget implementation. We're reviewing fund balances and financial position. As Doug said, we present quarterly to the ED&F committee the budget to actual statements showing where we are at each quarter, and that kind of gives you an idea of what our financial position is throughout the year. And that's part of our operations evaluation also, looking at those fund balances and to determine if our revenue projections are not where we thought they would be, do we need to make any adjustments as we're going through the year? And the final process of that is the financial audit, which we just brought to the commission last month, the audit of the 2017 financial statements. So this next slide just shows what goes into revenue estimating. We use best practices. We use a lot of recommendations. Our policies have recommendations from GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Association. Professional judgment, we'll look at economic forecast. Are there things in the economy that could affect our revenue forecasting? Historical trends, how have we done over the past several years? And also any policy restrictions that can affect what we can put into the budget. And all of that goes into our revenue estimates. This next slide just shows our 2019 budget revenue estimates. Our total revenue for all funds is $359 million for 2019. We're projected to be about 2.6% above where our estimates are in 2018. Of that total, $248 million or 69% is tax revenues. The combined general fund tax revenue is $193 million of that 248. So the graph shows the 69%, which is tax revenue. The next largest one would be charges for service, which is 17%. This next graph shows this is showing all the general fund revenue. So the three general funds, the city, the county, and the parks general fund, all total $228 million. And as you can see, that tax revenue is 84% of that total. The combined general fund 2019 revenues are expected to increase 1.8% to 2018. This next slide shows the general fund tax revenues, the $193 million, and this is the graph that breaks out all of the tax revenues for the three general funds. As you can see, property tax is the largest at 32%. Sales and use tax is 24%, the second largest. And then the third largest would be the BPU pilot. The electric and water together is 19% of the total tax revenues. This next slide was you've also seen this in the budget presentation. This is the graph of the top four general fund revenues: property tax, sales tax, franchise tax, and charges for service. The four top revenues total $167.2 million in 2019 and comprise 73% of the total general fund revenues.
So I just wanted to point out, add a little bit to Debbie's commentary. So the top one is the property tax, and you can see that we are estimating that revenue will come in at 3% above the 18 level. And we've talked a little bit about that during the budget presentation. The sales tax number is coming in, that's that blue line, and we're projecting that to come in at 4% above the prior year. It's actually 5% for the core sales tax amount, and then 4%, which diminishes the total, 4% for the use tax. You have to keep in mind that you see that it's bumped up quite a bit from 16 to 17. That's the addition of the STAR revenue money, but that STAR money is held at the same amount each year, because any growth of that amount goes to pay debt service on the soccer bonds. So the total, when you add up the use tax, the STAR bond money, and all the sales tax, you come up with an increase that's only 4%. But we're expecting retail activity to improve by about 5% next year. The purple line is franchise tax, which that incorporates the BPU's electric rate adjustment that occurred in March. So there was another one that occurred last year, or Actually, there's one, yeah, that occurred last year and then another one this year. And then the last one's charges for services. So, go ahead. Oh, is it mine? Okay, I'll do those. So, hey, yeah, this next slide is actually, I wanted to provide this to you just so that you have this information. I'm not going to really go over it in depth, but this is the property tax valuation as certified by our UG clerk. And so you can see here that this is for the 2019 original budget compared with the current year 18 budget. So you can see there's that 7.9% increase in assessed value that we were talking about. The majority of this $1.3 billion assessed value number is for real estate, 87% of it. And just a couple of things I wanted to bring to your attention is that last year we saw a dramatic reduction in this utilities account or utilities category. We're happy to report that that jumped back up to its prior levels to 90 million. New improvements is holding steady at the 20 or $19 million level. Personal property is decreasing steadily because of the aging of the outstanding machinery and equipment that is no longer taxable. So, overall, the increase is 7.9%. This is on the county side.
Yes, Commissioner.
Kathleen, real quickly, so that big jump is part of that big jump in the money for BPU, the additional business or industrial stuff that we're getting, or do you know that? No.
No, it
was just the rate adjustment.
Well, there were a couple of railroads that whose value improved over 18. It's a number of people. It's not a number of areas.
Okay, thank you. That's okay.
Kathleen, if you could just briefly again explain why the 7.9% improvement in assessed value does not result in 7.9% increased revenues.
Yes, thank you. I think that's an excellent segue to my next slide. So the next two slides actually explain that. I think it'll be clear. Now, as you know, we collect property tax not just for the county general fund and the city general fund, but we also collect it for the county bond and interest fund and the city bond and interest fund. And then finally for a variety of tax levy funds. I think there's about 8 or 9 of them, but they're listed on page 45 of your budget document. So in total, the mill levy that the unified government receives or assesses totals 76 mills, right? And so this is a calculation of how we have derived, how we've come up with our revenue estimate ultimately. So the final column, it adds up to $87 million among all these various funds. It starts out with the current mill levy, and except that we've dropped the city general fund down 2 mills. So last year it was 23 point, or actually when I say last year, I'm referring to the current fiscal year we're in. So in 2018, it is 23 mills right now. And our proposed 19 budget proposes that we drop it to 21, right? These are the assessed values for the top 5 here are for the county, and then the bottom 2 are for the city. So, and those match up with the previous slide here. See, it's 1.3 billion, so 1.3 billion. The cities is slightly smaller because Edwardsville and Louisville and a little bit of Lake Quivira have their own assessed values. So if you do the math, which you take this amount and then you take the assessed value and then you multiply it by 31 mills, for example, divided by 1,000, you'll end up with this number, 40 million, for example, on the top line, 40.5 million, right? Now, unfortunately, our collection history demonstrates that on the county side, our delinquency rate is 6.5%, and on the city side, it's 7%. And this has really been the case for the past, about 4 or 5 years. So that's what we have assumed in our revenue estimate. And so that reduces that $95 million by 6.3 for a net of 88.7 million. So we then unfortunately in 19, because of the expected, potentially we expect to refund Hollywood Casino for an appeal they submitted on their 2015 taxes. And so if that were to take place, this is the distribution amongst these various funds of the Hollywood Casino appeal. And I would like to also add that this does not include the part that would be paid by our neighboring taxing entities and school districts. So ultimately, it's the final calculation is 87.4. So now what we've done is, this next slide, we showed a comparison of the same calculation that we did for 2018 with this 2019 to show you the variance. And here's the variance here. So had we, so if we didn't have any delinquency or any Hollywood Casino refund, we may have, but we would have, and we didn't have this 2 mil reduction here. We would have achieved the 8% increase in revenue that is estimated, or that corresponds with our increase in assessed value. But because we're reducing our mill and by 2 mils on the city side, and we do have the delinquency rate, and we have to pay or are expecting to pay this refund to Hollywood Casino, the net increase is $3.3 million, which is roughly 3% greater than the amount we are collecting in the current year. So that's all we have for the sales or the revenue estimates for the 2019 budget. And I'm happy to provide any more additional information, but for the purposes of tonight's workshop, we thought that would be, sufficient amount of detail for you. As you know, I'm always available to answer any questions you might have. Should I go ahead?
I think you can go ahead into the forecast, Kathleen.
Right. Well, so we in response to a number of requests or inquiries from all of you, you're probably wondering, well, how does our proposed 2019 forecast affect our future, general fund financial performance? So we're using our Municast long-range financial forecasting model, and I'm going to go over the assumptions here in a bit, but overall, this is a picture or a display of how it looks. So so this is the combined general fund, all three general funds, city, county, and parks. And it's a 5-year forecast from 2009, well, it's actually 2020 to 2024. That's the 5-year forecast, with 19 being a proposed budget. We included a few prior years here so you can see the ramp up of our fund balance. The blue columns are the fund balance, total fund balance, and then the red line is the percentage of expenditures. So as we mentioned, our proposed revised financial policy recommends that we maintain 2 months of operating expenditures, and that equates to about 17%. So at the end of 17, given the actual that occurred, we are at 20.2% of the fund balance is at 20.2%, which is 3 percentage points higher than the 17 or 2 months of operating. So we're doing fairly well there. But in 18 and 19, we're proposing several, a combination of several one-time expenditures, but also some expenditures that are reoccurring. And so as a result, our forecast, although it reduces the expenditure levels for all those one-time items, it does reflect that if we don't make any corrective action, given all the assumptions I'm going to go over with you, then the reserves would fall to 9% of expenditures and transfers by the end of the forecast period, or in 5 years from now. Now, this assumes that assessed value will grow by a modest 2.8% beginning in 2020. And that 2.8% is derived by averaging the assessed value of all the prior 11 years. So it captures that deep recession that occurred in 2009. So it's a fairly modest AV growth assumption. But it's cautious and conservative. But last year I gave the same assumption, but it was you probably remember the 1.9%. Well, now it's 2.8% because of the substantial growth that occurred in our AV or for the 19 budget. So that's why it's improved so much. So it really makes a big difference when you get a big increase in your AV. It also assumes that we're going to have as proposed, we have a 2 mil reduction in the city general fund rate. So let me go over the little bit of the assumptions with you. Oh, by the way, I don't expect you to read this, but I provided it here so you can take a look at it in your hard copy. But this is a detail of all the various revenue categories and then all the expenditure categories. All right, so on the revenue assumption side, we're assuming, I think I mentioned this already, sales and use tax are estimated to grow 5%. The actual sales tax at 5% without accounting for STAR, by the way, 5% for 19. And then what I've done is I've taken an average growth rate for the prior 5 years and have applied that. So that turns out to be a 3.1% increase annually that I'm assuming. So that's kind of a dip between 19 and 20, but it's sort of assuming that there's going to be a little bit of a recession at some point or a slowdown in the economy at some point in the near future, but not during 19. Property tax revenues projected to increase, or the revenues projected to grow 3% in 19. That includes the 2 mil reduction in the city general fund, and then a 2.8% increase in the assessed value as well as the revenue going forward, beginning in 2020, and that's based on an AV growth of the period between 2013 and 2019. The delinquency rate is 6.5% on the county side and 7% on the city side. It also includes the casino refund that which amounts to about $457,000 on the county side and $360,000 on the city side. And we're expecting to pay that over the next 5 years. So this is an annual refund we expect to pay. Franchise tax, we're assuming a 3% increase in 19 and a 1.6% thereafter. And then charges of services, we're at 2.7 annually. Okay. On the expenditure side, you can read through this real briefly, at your leisure if you wish. But for the most part, we're assuming very conservative estimates for personnel, sufficient to sufficient to retain our current employee base and compensate them so that we are competitive with our neighboring local governments, but also to maintain our liabilities and the payment of our liabilities for pension and for health insurance. So nothing dramatic here, according to current contractual obligations. There is we've included inflationary adjustments to some of the contractual agreements that we have. For example, the ATA contract and others. We have included a savings on inmate housing, which is being utilized to pay the debt service on the Juvenile Justice Center. On capital outlay, we've projected that we're going to be spending $6.6 million a year on cash-funded capital outlay and equipment acquisitions. And the forecast also projects that that one-time $500,000 that we currently have proposed in the 19 budget to help with the Schlitterbahn task force prosecution would be taken out in 2020 because that's a one-time cost. All right. So now you're probably wondering, well, how does this differ from the forecast I gave you in March? Well, that's what this slide shows. I don't know if I need to go over it in too much detail, but I did want to point out that a couple of things. When we did the March estimate for the spring retreat, we didn't anticipate that we would be losing $800,000 in casino appeal refunds, so we didn't anticipate that. There's a slight reduction in the retail sales number. We had to adjust the Speedway excess sales tax revenue by about $600,000 a year because the financial performance has been lessening in that area. We had to eliminate the revenue source for mortgage registration due to full implementation of that law in 19. Then there are a few other things. We took out, as I mentioned, it took out the grand jury costs. There was unanticipated $500,000 in workers' compensation claims for the sheriff. So higher retirement costs than that I knew about in March. And then also the forecast had about $600,000 a year less in capital outlay than my forecast does right now. So things kind of change and shift over the past 6 or 7 months. So that doesn't look so good. But what if assessed value increased over the next 5 years from the 2.8% average that I was projecting, and what if it increased by 4% instead? So if that were the case, with all expenditure items being equal, then we would end up with a fund balance of 12% instead of 9%. Okay, so just to give you an idea how important just one economic factor can change things. Without adjusting the 2 mil, just keeping the reduction at 2 mils. So we this model is very flexible, and we can run a number of scenarios, and we're happy to do that. You just need to let us know. So, any questions?
Kathleen, so is there any historical trend, let's say over a 4 or 5 year period, that we saw annual valuation growth of 4%?
We have valuation going back all the way. Well, in this model, we have it for 15 years, and I would have to look, but I mean, it really kind of depends from year over year.
Sure. I'm just wondering, was there any trend in the past where we had a 4 year period where we saw average annual growth of 4%?
I would say it's not unrealistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate this model, and I appreciate the ability to flexibly forecast based on a number of different assumptions, but we all know that assessed value is really only important if we are actually capturing tax dollars on it. So every incentive we give where we have an increase in assessed value, but we don't collect tax dollars on that for a period of time, be it 1 year or 10 years, really confounds your model. And so I really think a valuable thing to throw in there would be some way to account for the incentives, especially property tax incentives that we give that put off for 10 years or a period of time our ability, because we need more rooftops that pay taxes in order for us to truly get this kind of appreciation in our revenue. So I just want to make sure that we're all clear that we can get a lot of building and we can say that we do a tremendous amount of economic development, but until it pays taxes, it doesn't become part of your model.
Yeah, a number of the tax increment financings we have outstanding for businesses to do, various commercial developments. We actually do collect the tax, but it goes to pay off the TIF debt. And so you never see it here because it's an area that, so it doesn't, we don't collect it in the general fund. It gets collected to pay off a debt service.
Absolutely.
In the TIF fund.
And we have other sorts of incentives where we're rebating some portion of.
Sales tax as well, yes.
So just to be careful that we're always thinking about not just the value, but what we're actually collecting on that value.
Yes.
Commissioner, there was this discussion today in the agenda review, going back to your point, suggestions for process moving forward in terms of how we do the budget. I'm really looking towards this coming year prior to the next budget cycle, that we in fact say, all right, we know what our forecasted expenditures are going to be for the next 5 years, just rate of growth, inflation, capers, KFP, all those things. We know what we can generally assign, what those are going to be. Well, if we want to take corrective action, the corrective action, again, is to get the rooftops to grow the tax base. But I'm not sure we've ever gotten to the point where we said, what's our target growth? And if that's our target growth, in order to be able to meet these expenditures and continue to do more projects, the things that need to get done to provide the services, what's our strategies for that economic growth, for that development? That conversation, I think, is going to be a topic, I think, for our fall retreat. Commissioner Walters, I just want to be clear before we move on. During the retreat in the spring, you had raised questions about the mill rate and how did we arrive at the 2 mills, and I don't know if that question has been answered for you or.
No, it didn't have. I don't know if you wanted to get into that this evening or not. I guess my question is, the 2 mills that is being proposed in the 2019 budget is a continuation of the program we've done for 3 years now, and I just wonder if it's become something of an arbitrary number that we just fall back on. And I'd really like some conversation about forecasts. I'm thinking back to 2 years ago when we were doing this exercise for the 2017 budget, and we proposed a 2 mil reduction, and we had all of the information, all the financial projections, revenues, expenditures, all the same stuff we're getting tonight. And we talked about doing more than 2 mills, and we were cautioned that no, we can't do that. In fact, our budget is actually showing a reduction in the fund balance, which was the original budget that we adopted for the 2017 year. So now, a couple weeks ago, we actually got hard information for that year, and instead of having a $3 million reduction, we had a $6 million increase in the fund balance. So that's a $9 million swing. And we were talking about, could we do 2 mills or 3 mills? And so with that, ability or inability to project even 6 to 18 months into the future, I don't get too concerned about 5-year long projections, but I do wonder if we're just building in too much conservative estimating, both on the revenue and the expenditure side, that is keeping us from achieving what our residents say is their #1 priority, which is property tax reduction. So I've heard the presentations on revenue, and I've heard the presentation on expenditures, and I certainly can't nitpick anything. I just go back to, here's hard evidence from 2 years ago. We used the same processes. It was a $9 million swing. And I don't know that it's going to be any different in 2018, and I don't know that it's going to be any different in 2019. So it's good to be conservative on both revenue and expenditures, but we do have something of a mandate from our residents to try to lower taxes. And I think we're being rather conservative about it.
Commissioner, Kathleen, can you tell me, has there been a $9 million addition in our reserve funds?
So in the CAFR, on a modified accrual basis for 17, there was a $9 million addition to our fund balance at the end of 2017. And that's because revenues were, well, I'm working off the top of my head here, but revenues were roughly $3.5 or $4 million higher than our budget. And then expenditures were roughly $3.5 or $5 million lower than our budget. So there are some explanations for that. Generally speaking, there are, on average, we do on average come in below our budgets. And I think there was an average around $3 million every year for the past 10 years. It's been the case. We are a little bit concerned about the retirement of our silver tsunami that I spoke with during the forecast. So we do have monies in our personnel line to pay for retirements and accrued leave, which we're obligated to pay. And it's hard to predict when people are going to retire. So I do want to note that during 17, the rate of retirement slowed down more so than I expected. So that is a little bit of an explanation for the difference. On the revenue side, there's a couple of areas where I underestimated the BPU, the effect of the rate adjustment to the BPU pilot. I based it on information that had been given to me. But it turned out that it was too conservative. So we ended up collecting more than I anticipated. There was also adjustments in other areas related to the STAR bond payoff and the timing. So, we paid off the STAR bonds on December 1st of 2016. But the state and our escrow agent took a while in order to develop the calculations. It's really complicated for determining our soccer base. So they couldn't remit us the money until April. And so April came, instead of it showing up in 16, it showed up in 17 on our financial statements. Because of our accounting rules. We couldn't accrue it back to 17 because we had collected it too far into the year in 17. So as a result, we came into monies in 17 that we were expecting to have collected in 16. So that is part of the increase too. So really one-time things that just were not anticipated, and that resulted in the additional 9. So, yeah.
But 2016 looked pretty good too. We added more to our fund balance in 2016 than we budgeted, did we not?
I got it right here. Thank you, hon.
I don't have 2016 with me.
Well, the combined general fund on a cash basis was, the net change in fund balance was a negative 1.8 million in 16. So it wasn't as positive as, it wasn't positive in 16.
What was the budget?
Well, I don't have that in front of me, so. But revenues were 1.8 million less than expenditures in 16. And so.
So we're halfway through the year, or was that trend continuing? Were we too conservative in our expenditures and overly?
Well, we took a hard look at the actuals through May. We waited till about 2 weeks ago, the revenue estimate stopped moving because we were looking at actual experience through May. And I adjusted the sales tax number upward based on that actual performance and a number of other areas too, motor vehicle registration and other areas. So I don't think it's overly conservative, but it's tough to anticipate what's going to happen in the next 6 months. We didn't expect, for example, the workers' comp claim or the Hollywood appeal case or the Schlitter bond. Those sorts of things are difficult to anticipate. So hopefully there will be things that happen in the next 6 months which will be positive and improve our financial performance rather than drag it down. But
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes, I just need to get a clarification. The second bullet point says it's a 2 mil city meal reduction beginning in 2019. Is that continual or is that just one time?
No, it's continued. Yeah, so that's what, beginning in 19 and then it continues.
2021, 22, 2 meals each year?
No, then it would be reduced it from 23 to 21 and then it's 21 from there out.
Okay.
Commissioner Burrows?
Thank you. Kathy, the economic trends that we can anticipate, what was our employment or unemployment rate over the last couple of years? Do we know how that what that may have impacted? I'm looking at the delinquencies as well as home ownership, as well as joblessness in reference to some of the economic impacts that can happen to the budget. Right now, we're seeing what I would consider nearly full employment. Wyandotte County is a little behind the state, but still doing well. Our delinquencies have always been a major concern of mine. But do we have an industry standard as to what the delinquency will be in a budget our size?
Yes, actually, I discussed that in the long-range financial forecast that I put out about a year or more ago, and we plan to update that forecast. I'm updating it now. The industry standard for most, or the average delinquency rate for most communities is around 2%, but it really varies a lot on the percentage of your total taxpayers that already have paid off their homes and are not on an escrow system for paying their mortgage. Because if you are on an escrow, then you're more likely, it greatly enhances your the collection rate. So it kind of depends. Yeah, but I did want to point out that on page 10 of the budget document is, as part of the county administrator's budget message, there are 2 pages that talk about the economic trends over the past year or 2 years and what we foresee happening in the future. So I can talk about that if you'd like.
We can catch at it at a later time. In reference to Commissioner Walters' comments, we can be too conservative by looking at those things that we think can have a negative impact, and we want to prepare for them, but at the same time, we're cheating ourselves of services and investment opportunities long-term for projects that could be funded today or bonded today at a lower rate than what they would cost us 3 years down the road. So I'm just kind of looking at those economic trends, and those are of interest. And Mayor, I might suggest that we have an individual on the state side who can come and give an overview of the economic impacts that we can expect in the state of Kansas, an overview. I don't know if it'd be of interest to the commission or not, but maybe it would give some guidance as to what we can expect as we move forward working on the budget.
Commissioner, I spoke with that gentleman, and he's willing to come and talk with you if you'd like. Or with the commission, make a presentation, just whenever it works for everyone's schedule. But overall, we find that the unemployment rate is dropping slightly, although our unemployment rate through May is 4.8%, and the national economy is around the 3% rate. So we're always quite a bit lower or higher than the national economy, but it has been improving or diminishing over the past few years. The jobs rate grew pretty well too. By the fourth quarter of 2017, it was a good 3,000 jobs higher than the fourth quarter of 2016. And we think that's probably attributed to the Amazon Fulfillment Center. So now it's at 93,000, or at the end of the quarter, it was 93,000 jobs.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. It is probably that, and all the hard work that Wyandotte Economic Development Group did to help work with that and everybody else with Workforce Partnership, Kansas Works and them. But I want to say that I agree with him. It would really be nice to have the gentleman from the state come down and speak with us, and the commissioners that are interested in participating in that mind debacling thing would be wonderful. And would you ask him to make it, economics for dummies? Because, he's got to speak basic to me, because sometimes this stuff gets too convoluted. So I'd appreciate it. And if we could do that sometime this fall before our fall retreat. What's the matter, Mike? Mike's lost it. Somebody get a picture of Mike. I'm only speaking for myself, Mike.
Okay. Next item on our agenda, if there's no other questions regarding the revenues to get to this point, is to get to the setting of the maximum mill levy. As I noted earlier, setting of the maximum mill levy is one where, I've put forward a budget to say that I recommend it be at 2 mills down. On the city side, I am recommending that we set a maximum mill rate at our current mill rate for the city side and our current mill rate for the county. Couple reasons for that, I guess, as you go through the month of discussions, if you decide there are things you need to fund, you can have that consideration of have that latitude to work with it. You can always lower, but what we publish as our maximum mill rate is as highest point as we can go to. And I would also offer that if the sales tax, dedicated sales tax, is not renewed, that we would come back and revisit that, because that's a $10 million hit on our budget, and I don't think we should start to drop away our mill rate if it's the will of the people to put more reliance on property tax than sales tax. So that would give us that latitude. We could go through and adopt a budget, but then you could come back and fall back on that and put that back in play. So I am recommending that you set a maximum mill rate based on what's on the right-hand column of the 40 mills for the city, the 38.8 for the county, the self-supporting municipal improvement district for the downtown. We have to set their mill rate each year, and this is the rate they requested at 11. And then the library, which is another one that we have to set their mill rate at the 6 mills.
Commissioner McKiernan?
I'm just ready to make a motion if you want one.
Discussion first, or a motion, or we could have a motion and then discussion. So I have a couple of concerns that as you did the projections looking forward, and of course Commissioner Walters has raised questions about whether maybe we build in too conservative, and I guess I'm of the opinion that I'd rather have the money when we get there rather than have to go scramble for it. I do have a concern that if we did set the maximum rate at 38, as we were inclined to do, that would hinder us in the chance that the dedicated sales tax would not be renewed. That would put us in a very difficult position. On the other hand, if we do set it, take the recommendation of the administrator and keep it at its current level at 40.032, My concern would be then we would be looking for ways to spend that money if the dedicated sales tax. Nope. All right. We're putting it out there. Okay. Thank you. Well, we've all heard it. I'd entertain a motion, Commissioner McKiernan.
We have. Yeah, exactly. And I will say that for the 7 budgets that I've been in, we have been consistent about setting the maximum above the administrator's recommendation and then following the administrator's recommendation on each and every mill rate that we have set. So we've demonstrated that we are prepared to go with the administrator's budget regardless of setting the maximum just a little bit higher than that. So on the Kansas City, Kansas mill levy, I would make a motion that the maximum mill levy for the city of Kansas City, Kansas be set at 40.0032 mils.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Roll call, Kane. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
I would make a motion that we set the maximum mill levy for Wyandotte County at the administrator's recommendation of 38.8799 mils.
Second.
Motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Roll call, Kane. Aye. Markley.
Aye.
Walters. Aye. Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Because there is still a little bit of flux in the self-supporting municipal improvements district in terms of just understanding completely their revenue and expense picture for next year, the administrator's recommendation is 11.0257. I would make a motion that we set the maximum mill levy for the self-supporting municipal improvement district at 12.00 mils.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for 12.00 mils.
Question?
Mr. Kane.
And we want to raise it because?
No, we want to give ourselves the same flexibility that we're giving ourselves on the city side, where we set it, this is, the 12.00 is 0.6 mils less than last year, but still over the target we're shooting for, but it gives us the flexibility like we've done on the city side.
Roll call.
Roll call, Kane. Aye. Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
I would make a motion to set the maximum mill levy for the Wyandotte County Library at 6.0417 mils.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Roll call, Kane. Aye. Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Burrows.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Thank you all.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is really discussion about the future workshops. I can walk through these and let you know what's kind of on tap for each one if you have any questions about this. So we slated for Thursday, after going through this with the mayor, that would be a good opportunity for elected officials to come in. I extend this invitation out to the district court, to the administrative judge Lamson, to Register of Deeds Nancy Burns, the sheriff, and also to our DA, Mr. Dupree. Mr. Dupree did ask that he be able to come back and be part of that discussion. He did want to come in and talk about what has been recommended as part of his budget and have that discussion with you. So he has confirmed he will be available this Thursday. Also, there was a request for information regarding the Slitterbond case, so he will be able to speak to that, though I do believe he is trying to provide some information, Commissioner Walters, to you in advance, so if that's good, or he'll be here to answer any questions or discuss it in more detail, so either way on that. I will also note that the sheriff probably has a couple of different areas that he'll be over here on. I know he wants to be present, I believe, when we have the debt discussion on the county debt, when we're talking about the juvenile facility, but he didn't have anything specific he wanted to present. And then he'll probably be over as well when we have our discussion on building security. So also slated for Thursday, the downtown shareholders wanted an opportunity to come back before the commission. And I believe we were still getting confirmation on that. I believe they're good for it on Thursday to come here. And then we will talk about debt in more detail. This is more requests from the governing body to sit down and go where we're at on debt as we look for where we're at on the city general fund and then the county one, as I mentioned earlier, about how that projects out in the future. So we'll have a presentation built for that one. Commissioner Margui had asked several questions regarding benefit districts and what we funded for a number of years. So that's somewhere between, well, I'm not sure. I was not aware she was not going to be here tonight. Okay. Though we're providing information to her, so we have it slated as time on the calendar. And if there's some reason we need to move it, I'm sure the mayor would adjust. The Parks Master Plan, that's up there just for a little bit of discussion regarding the outstanding capital needs that are in play for that. Have discussions regarding that topic. Looking ahead to the 23rd, that is really focused on CMIP, so we will walk through what we presented you to May, and any changes we made from May to what's in this document will have red flashing lights on it. Commissioner McKernan?
Well, why, thank you. Once bitten, twice shy. I've looked really closely through the CMIP debt and cash this year, and I have a lot of questions, not all of which need to be brought back here to the larger group. They're just clarifying for my own information, but I do have a couple that I will forward to you for inclusion on the 23rd. Just a couple of questions about a couple of the projects in cash and in debt, but most everything that I'm going to send you is just for my own knowledge and doesn't have to be brought to the open meeting.
Okay, thank you. So we'll walk through that to point out anything that changed from where we ended May. And as you recall, when we do May, that's where we project, but then I got to go and balance the budget to get it out in July. So there are a few changes that do happen from that time to now. Specifically, we want to talk about the street preservation program. That's one that you funded last year. So Mr. Fisher will be here with his team to talk about how that project has been working and then how we'll project our cost needs and our needs on those streets going forward. Specific discussion requested regarding K7 and parallel on that project. And then also we want to talk about building security and what we're doing coming up and maybe some other thoughts or ideas that could come in around that from Chief Ziegler and Sheriff Ash. And we also have some information that we were working through on the Kaw River levy, so we'll be able to talk about that next week. On July 26th, we are looking to have a discussion about economic development, some of the plans that we've put forward, but have not really put much funding toward those. And then department special funds. This is a specific request that has been brought forward by, well, I'll say a few of the commissioners, but I know the Economic Development Standing Committee made note of it last time. So what the mayor has asked us to do in advance of that, which we're working on, is we're getting a sheet out that'll show each one of those fund areas, if there is special legislation regarding those, and then it kind of specifies how that money can be expended. And this really comes to the fund balance, and that was the question within those, because some of them have by percentage, a very high fund balance, but some of them are restricted. You can't spend it outside of it. Some of them, there's a future plan to it. So we'll try to speak to those in a summary sheet and get those out to you well in advance. And then if there's a few of them that are still left that we want to have discussion on, we can bring those department heads that where I need to have those for more expertise. And then as we look forward to the 30th and the 2nd, we do not have anything planned for those. It would be my hope that we get through most of our detail by the 26th. So on the 30th, those of you who've been here before, that's where we have the opportunity to come in with kind of a wrap-up sheet. If we've added something to the budget or take it away, we can show how we balance things and put those forth to come in on that date. Also, we have the final public hearing. So that's kind of what we have so far from the commissioners, and if there's additional things, then we'll continue to take those in and figure out how to put them on the budget.
Mr. Kane.
I appreciate the citizen and it going out, but I've had some people that said on the neighborhood infrastructure, where was work done? And I got that question multiple times just here since the letter's been out. And I know that we've got the target map, which is great.
Yeah.
But they say, where's one started, where's one finished? You know, and right now, that's a driving force on some people want to know. Yeah, we supported it last time, but where did the monies go? And if you spell it out for the police and the fire, they just need clarification for the infrastructure. And then I want a...
So again, so you mentioned again that it is available on the website. If you go to that map and people hover over the
they
star,
want
the
more
asterisk.
specific detail.
It does, yes, okay.
And a good example of that, when the area got annexed 20 some odd, 30 some odd years ago, they were promised roads, fire station, and other things that they didn't get. And the segue to the fire station. We voted on the fire station last budget, and I keep being told that it's the fall. So what I'd like to have is a month-by-month breakdown of what has happened since we voted on it, and then I want a more specific time frame of when we're going to do this in the fall. We've been working on this for 10 months, or not working on it for 10 months, and it's kind of hard to believe that you vote on something and it takes this long to get this off the ground. You know, so I'm very familiar with the construction field and how it works, both from my former career and my current career. So I want to know when we started working on it. And then I think, Joe, did you go out of town and to see how fire stations were built or something like that? That would have been nice to know. I would have went. And being kept in the dark just agitates the hell out of me. We've got somebody trying to build something that we haven't built in years. Staff doesn't tell the commissioner in the area, which I think is kind of strange, that they went somewhere and I could have gained as much knowledge as they did. So I'm quite frustrated about not being invited to go to that. And we took 2 of our fire folks there.
The 2 deputy chiefs at the time actually were going to go to the conference, and they invited me to come along.
You're the one then, you know. I've been here 13 years and never had a project this big, and we've always tried to make sure that when we're working on something that we keep us abreast of what's going on. I was asked just here a couple minutes ago about where we're at with the fire station. I got a couple of phone calls today for from retired fire personnel, and the lack of information is getting to a boiling point for me. And I mean it. You know, we cannot, you guys may not like it, but the commission voted on it. And I'm extremely frustrated when I found out that these guys went to the fire station build or how to build one. And maybe it makes them mad that I know more about safety than some of these other guys do. That's my field. And I would have gathered all that information. And if I'd have been Joe Connors, I would have came back and told the commission, hey, guess what I just learned? But instead I had to find out by somebody else, and we're all left in the dark.
Commissioner will do a better job. I mean, I would agree. Updates to you should be done, and you should know what's going on in that fire station.
I should have been involved when they went there. And the at-large commissioners should have had the opportunity to go. Because they're going to ask you as many questions as they're going to ask me. And I didn't know about this trip until the other day when they were talking to me like, well, hell, you know they went to that trip, don't you? Well, no, I didn't. And I tried to do the best I can for the district. And the district does not like being left in the dark, and will not be left in the dark by the time this budget process is over.
Commissioner Bynum?
Just two quick comments on this. Number one, on these projects. If we could get even just a little bit more, and I would say maybe specifically for District 5, or any district, detail on hovering on the map and getting information, if we could just get maybe an update of the last year or so. Actually, I would say maybe 3 or 4 years, because it's a 10-year tax. You know, we're coming to the end.
And that was their question. It's not, it's where's the money been for the last 8 years?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Still got 2 more years left. So what have you done so I can say, they did this, this, and that, and oh, by the way, this is on the planning process to get done.
And I would say, you know, there's probably a top 20 that's a highlight list, that's fair, that we would all find useful. I think that's something we could ask for. And then with regard to the fire station, maybe if we could get a meeting with the administrator and deputy administrator, and we could get a good update. At least for now, we'd have a good update on what's happening with this, with the station.
I don't disagree with that, but I think the public wants to know too. And that they're watching this. I'm getting text messages right now. That they're watching this and asking me, what are you doing? How come it hadn't happened? And when I found out these guys went on a road trip, I couldn't believe it. You know, so yes, I want one without them in case I get excited. And then I want the public to see what's going to happen.
Be a good presentation at one of our standing committees.
That'd be great.
Thanks.
Commissioner
I
Mark?
was just going to say, you know, I'm assuming that the information on this map comes from a database of some kind. If it wouldn't be too difficult to just get a list by district, that would, I think, be ideal. I mean, I'd like to say all of my constituents can go and hover over the dots. I'm not entirely sure that that would happen. But that way, as we're going to neighborhood meetings, we can present to our neighborhood group the printout of here's what happened in our district with this money.
Thank you. Commissioner Burrows?
Well,
3/8 cent sales taxes generate roughly 100 million over the 10 years. Is that correct?
It hadn't quite been that much. I think we're projecting it to be up to about 80. We're just up to the 10 million mark. We're getting to the 10 million mark annually now. We weren't that way in the first several years.
So over a 10-year period, 80 million, and 3.5 going to police, 3.5 going to fire. The 30% that's left over will go to those projects. I think it's pretty easy to slate. We can break out those projects by district that need significant attention and start budgeting appropriately through that process, because the other 35% is taken by both entities, fire and police. The infrastructure is a total number and divided among the community, constituents, districts, and those districts in need. I think we might help on the transparency as to what projects need to be addressed and how much money they'll run before we even get started on them.
well, so Commissioner, I just wanted to point out that so I believe that the GIS or folks in the Information Technology Department were able to identify where the projects were geographically for some, but not all, because a lot of the capital kind of infrastructure maintenance amounts were for maintenance, and they don't necessarily you know, slot those out by project and geography. They just put it in this kind of lump maintenance area. So there may be a little bit of difficulty with that, but I know the GIS guys went through and did the best they could and identified some of it, but maybe not all of it. So, yeah, a good portion of the dedicated sales tax is dedicated for funding personnel and operating costs in the public safety side, so.
Well, if my math serves me correctly, it's about 28 million for the police, 28 million for the fire. So there's already 56 million. So we have about 22 million to 25 million roughly for economic development projects for infrastructure that could go divided among the commission districts or collectively go to projects that help bring ancillary development and opportunity, which would in turn create some of the other issues that we've been dealing with this evening. So I've just tried to do the simple math, the three-way split on a 3/8 sales tax, because I think it's extremely important that the community see what they're getting for their investment. And I believe the roadways, curbs, sidewalks, enhanced parks, safe intersections, walkability, those things that we've talked about since I've been on the commission are very important to the citizens of this community, and I know the leaders here are willing to do their part to make it happen.
Well, that seems to wrap it up. Anything else, Administrator Bach?
I don't have anything else this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.